Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and this is part 2. And it's not because I made a mistake and pushed the wrong button, it's because this really is part 2 of the Eudes Picard manual, Synthetic and Practical Manual of the Tarot by Eudes Picard. This was a book he wrote, so it's in his own words, albeit translated from, I presume, French to English. Now, the first part of the video that I shared was just more or less an overview, whereby we got an idea, a general idea of how he approached tarot, what he believed were the origins of tarot, and commenting on how each card had a range of days. So each card in the pip order represents about 6 days. And the elements are broken down into astrological signs. So, for example, if you had a multitude of swords in a reed, then the safe thing to say would be, it will happen during a water sign. Remember, the swords are water, cups are air, and then what he calls scepters, we call batons or wands, is fire, as usual, not always, but as usual. And then the coins, or the deniers, or the pentagrams, or the pentacles, is earth. So that part 1 covered like up to page 19. And the second part, which is this, will be, hopefully I'll be able to get all the triumph cards in this section. If not, I'll indicate that in the title. Now, bear in mind that he calls the triumph cards the Major Arcana, which was typical, I think, in the day when the occultists were hanging out and doing their thing. Also, I failed to mention that in the first part, we get an awareness that he says one has to have an understanding of the Kabbalah, and also a very keen astrological knowledge, because his belief was that it came from Egypt, right, where that stuff was transmitted to their period of time by who they called the gypsies. That was the term used. So, their perspective is different than ours, so bear that in mind, right? So for the first, and I will, the deck that I am referencing is the Eudes Picard Tarot, which was published by Noreah Brownsfield in 2020. Regrettably, it's out of print. And so you may ask, well, what's the point in showing this video or doing this? It's because it's interesting to understand the occultists and where they came from. And we've discussed, Oswald Wirth in the past. I've done extensive videos on Atea. So it seems only fair that I do one on Eudes Picard. Since I happen to have a deck and I happen to have the book written in his own words, why not? Now, bear in mind that if you don't have this deck, you could reference a few other decks that utilize his system, such as the El Gran Tarot Esoterico. I think Fournier put that one out. And there is another one called the Crystal Tarot, which differs a little bit, but generally acknowledges Eudes Picard's established philosophy. So let's flip the camera, and I'll show you the cards. I did definitely mention that for his Triumph Order cards, he was referencing an Italian deck that was designed in the Marseille tradition. So he was using a tarot deck from Italy, published in 1736, called the Giuseppe Ottone Tarot. And as I mentioned, it was done by an Italian, but it was in the fashion of the French cards. So that was his inspiration for creating his Triumph Order cards. Now, with the Triumph Order, he begins the cycle with the Magician, and he ends it with the World. It doesn't quite say where the Fool falls, because he says he begins with the magician and ends with the world, but I presume that it falls typically after the world card, because the Fool card is seen not to have a position. It could equally fall anywhere in a deck and be at home. So the way I'm not going to show you every single page, but I'm going to show you with the magician how it's broken down. What he has is, for every one, he has the card, and then he gives a descriptive of what it looks like. Remember, he based his drawings on the Giuseppe Ottone deck from the Piedmont region of Italy, 1736. Then he gives for each one the astrological planetary correspondence, whatever number it is, and then the letter of the Kabbalah, or the Hebrew alphabet, excuse me, and then the commentary, which I think, for example, he'll give a few definitions, like the absolute being in the divine world, something in the intellectual world, something in the psychic world, right? So he'll give these three divisions, which I probably won't give it for every card, and I just don't. It's too complicated. One of the things he says is make it not complicated, and then it's extremely complicated. But then there's kind of like a general thing, the counselor, the principal, the man, the father, the earth. And then we get a general sense of what the word is, and then he just says will. So I'm not sure if the commentary is equivalent to maybe keywords or things to note, but then the general sense is just the will. So that, I think that might be the general meaning that is given. So I will use each of the cards, and I'll show you the cards. They were the color was filled in. I think that decision was made when it was published, obviously. And I'm not positive, but I think I recall reading that this deck, as it was published, I believe used the images as they appeared in Stuart Kaplan's, one of his encyclopedias. And I have all of his encyclopedias. I don't know which one it was, but I guess I could have checked to find out which one. But that's what I read briefly and kind of stuck in my head. So I will just, for each of the Triumph cards, I'll tell you what the number is, what the letter is. Some of you may be interested in the Hebrew letter. I'm not going to get into all of the commentary because save that for if you want to get the book. And I imagine the book is available wherever books are sold, because it's not out of print or anything. So it's, go to your favorite bookstore or, online, however you buy books, and I'm sure you'll find it. So it corresponds with the sun, as I mentioned. It's number 1, which we know. It correlates with the letter Aleph. It's called the Bateleur. Some of the commentary references it as man or God, unity in the intellectual world, skill, cunning, diplomacy, dexterity, or some keywords that were thrown out. And then the general sense, as I mentioned, was will. For the female pope, she's called the Papesse, a crowned woman with a tiara. Her head is surrounded by a veil, is the descriptive thing he gives it. It corresponds with mom? Oh, moon, excuse me. My own handwriting. I was going to say, well, that doesn't sound right. It corresponds with mom, the letter 2, and the letter bet. The commentary, some of the commentaries, it's the sanctuary of the occult church, the binary, the consciousness of the absolute being in the diverse divine world, the binary of the absolute being in the intellectual world, and the woman of absolute being in the psychic world. It's the counselor, the divine substance, secret mysteries, and in the general sense, the word is science. So here we have a woman he describes as being a winged and crowned figure holding a scepter with the globe of her world. Correlates to the world, number 3, and the letter is Gimel. The commentary, some of the commentary, I'm not saying all of it, is fecundity, nature, balanced power of active intelligence and wisdom, universal trinity, divine, spiritual, and physical, germination, fertilization, generation, fermentation. So the understanding of the card is not that different from what some of us may apply to it. In the general sense, the word he uses is action. Now we have the Emperor. Represented or associated, with Jupiter. A ruler whose body represents a right triangle, which is interesting, and whose legs represent a cross seated on a cubic throne. Represents number 4 in the letter Dalet. His commentary is government in the East, authority, protection, a perfect square, affirmation, power, support, stability, and in the general sense, he calls it realization. So we could see number 4 as, matter, right? But being brought into the real world. Okay, for the 5th card, as I turn my pages with my notes, we have the Pope seated between 2 columns of Hermes and Solomon, as he describes them. He makes the sign of esotericism. Really, I think it was like a blessing or a benediction or something like that. And he leans on the cross with 3 cross pieces. Before him are 2 lower ranking individuals, but really there's 3. There's really 3. Let me pull the Spanish deck and see if there's not 4. Okay, so interestingly, in the Spanish tarot, there is 2, as he describes, but in his own deck, he looks like he's got 3. If these are the tonsured heads, unless that's not a tonsured head. At any rate, 2 or 3, but in his book, he describes it as 2. The astrological correspondence is Mercury. The number is 5. The letter is He, or He. The commentary is a demonstration of law, religion, philosophy, being substance in the divine world, being in substance in the divine world. Religion in the intellectual world, inspiration, priest, physician, and the general sense given is inspiration. Now for the Lover, he describes a man standing between vice and virtue. Above him shines the sun of truth, as he calls it, who stretches his bow and threatens vice with his arrow. So I suppose the arrow is closest to this must be vice. And I would have identified this card as vice anyway, because she looks a little more tempting than this one. The astrological correspondence for this card is Virgo, obviously number 6, and the letter is Vav, V-A-V. The commentary is union, the science of good and evil into the divine world, attraction, love, beauty, and in the general sense, a test. Interesting. So if this card were to pop up, if you were to take the idea that this could be seen as a test, not just a choice, but actually a test, right? You're being tested. That's an interesting, an interesting point of view for it. Okay, the next one is the Chariot, described as a cubic, 4-columned chariot with a starry blue cloth, which I don't see here, which is not described in this card, but he describes it as a starry blue cloth. Between the columns, a crowned winner. So this guy is a victor. Attached to the chariot are sphinxes, describing it as attached to the hip, it looks like, attached by their lower part. On the chariot is, I guess this must be it right here, is the Indian Lengrim crowned by the flying sphere of the Egyptians. The astrological association is Sagittarius, it's number 7, and the letter is Zayin, Z-A-Y-I-N. The commentary is weapons, triumph, sovereignty, priesthood, spirit over nature. triumph, victory, ability, and in the general sense, he references it as victory. Justice, with swords and scales. The astrological correspondence is Libra. The letter is Chet, C-H-E-T. The commentary that I wrote down, remember, he wrote a whole lot more than I am sharing. It's just, I'm just giving a few words that caught my eye. Attraction and repulsion. Justice, equity, in the general sense, references it as equilibrium. Here we have the Hermit. Astrological association is Neptune, number 9. The letter is Tet, T-E-T. The commentary, good, horror of evil, morality. So that's a different slant. Usually we see it as wisdom, which could encompass a horror of evil or morality. Certainly now, with this understanding that he sees it as like morality, if you were to see it with the Fortitude card, it would really suggest, a strong sense of self-dignity or self-worth, or the need for that if it's lacking. Absolute wisdom in the divine world, prudence in the intellectual world. And if you recall, prudence, the occultists were, I think constantly trying to figure out which of the virtue cards prudence was. But I think as I recall, the Italians may have had prudence in some of the extended pack tarot decks, but in the, the Minchiati, for example, but, in the 78 card deck or the more brief card deck, they eliminated prudence because I think they were kind of adhering more to a Platonist, virtue kind of system. So, I think the Italians maybe weren't putting prudence in, but the occultists assumed that it must have been included at some point. So some of them named, I think, the Hermit as prudence, and some of them associated maybe the Hanged Man as prudence. So it's just my vague memory of that. Let's see. Commentary, good, horror of evil, morality, absolute wisdom in the divine world, prudence in the intellectual world. And prudence. And then there was a notation, 3/3, the mirror image of the three worlds, the divine, the intellectual, and the physical. And the general sense word he gave was prudence for the Hermit. Okay, number 10, the Wheel of Fortune. He has, in his descriptive area, the dog ascends and the monkey descends. A sphinx holds a sword. It's associated with Capricorn, the number 10, and the letter is Yod. Commentary, principal phallus, virile, fecundity. Interesting. So it's kind of like the male empress. Number 10 contains all the other numbers. It's universal and absolute. Number 1 is being, and non-being is 0. And other words he uses is fortune, destiny, elevation, and in the general sense, he calls it fortune. Here we have fortitude. He describes her in part as a woman crowned with a lemniscate. So he sees the hat as a lemniscate. And effortlessly is closing the mouth of an enraged lion. So he sees the lion as enraged, and that the virgin or the woman is effortlessly closing the mouth. He associates it with Leo. The number is 20, interestingly, not 11. And the letter is Kaf, K-A-F. Some of the commentary is force, energy, work, and the general sense word he gives is strength. Okay, so the next one, the Hanged Man, he describes as a man who hangs by one foot, and his hands are tied behind his back, and his legs cross over the triangle. So I'm not really sure what triangle. unless he's saying that they form a triangle, something like that. He identifies the gallows as the shape of the Hebrew Tav. The astrological correspondence is Uranus. Number is 30. The letter is Lamed, Lamed. The commentary is teaching or public lecture, a man who dies for the idea, atonement, sacrifice, martyrdom, and in the general sense, the one word is sacrifice. Now remember, in the part 1 introductory that I gave, I did mention that Eudes Picard mentions that the actual word of the card has to be part of the definition that you give. And then I think we're going to end with death today. I'll continue with the other less than half. But, the finality card seems to be a good card to end with. He describes it as the death figure reaping heads and hands in a meadow. The astrological correspondence is Saturn. He identifies it as number 40, and the letter is Mem, M-E-M. The commentary is domination and force, rebirth, creation, destruction, perpetual motion of creation, destruction, renewal. And the general sense he gives the definition as death. So that seems like a decent spot to end. It's at 20 minutes. And I'll continue with temperance through the Fool in tomorrow's video. Bear in mind, I'm wearing the same thing all 3 days because I'm doing them in succession of one another. So I'm not wearing the same outfit for 3 days, just so you know. And if you've been enjoying my videos, I don't ask it enough, but if you could please give me a thumbs up, a subscription if you haven't already, share it, hype it. I think people are hyping videos nowadays, so if you could hype it for me, that would even be great too. Anything to get me noticed, allows me to buy more decks. Okay, until next time, peace, stay well, be brave, be kind.